first scripture reading is from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, astrologers from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born, King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay homage to him." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the astrologers and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they found the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
Continuing the story. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. And this was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the astrologers, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the astrologers. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they were no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
I'd like a show of hands to start, if you'll indulge me. How many of you in this room have moved more than a few miles away from your home in your lifetime? To another state, to another country, for a job, or for the family? Nearly everyone. I became an immigrant this year. I have moved to Honduras for my work, and I have applied for permanent residency in that country. Of course, I did this by choice. I sought a job, I was called by the Presbyterian Church, and I accepted the call. We don't have to have a show of hands for this question, but I'd like to ask you anyway. How many of you who have moved because threats of violence forced you? Or because your children were starving? How many of you have moved because you had no choice? In this scripture that we read today, there is much migration. Magi from Persia to Judea, Joseph and Mary and Jesus from Judea to Egypt, the Magi back to Persia or wherever it was they were from. Joseph and Mary and Jesus from Egypt to Galilee. There is much migration, but very little choice. The only person who doesn't move in this story is King Herod, a puppet king of the Roman Empire, a cacique or a Maharaja to modernize the term. King Herod stays still. He wields enormous power here. He holds it so tightly and so fearfully that he is willing to slaughter hundreds or even thousands of infants, simply because he's afraid of losing or sharing power. Herod's word was law. These astrologers traveling from Baghdad or Persia would have known this. All of Jerusalem, or all of the privileged courts paying homage to Rome, displayed their fear of this newly rumored king of the Jews. So even for these foreign wise people, to disobey Herod was to disobey Caesar. To disobey Caesar was to disobey God himself. So what are we to make of their decision to protect the holy child by going home on a different route? They certainly made a choice, and a risky choice. They could have been hauled in and arrested, tortured, forced to tell, or forced to stay put. By the grace of God and luck, yes, but also by their civilly disobedient choice, the wise ones from the east, the Christ child's life was spared. They made a radical, law-breaking decision. They could have taken the legal route. They could have looked for God where the powers of the day told them they should look for God, in the empire, in the law, in the king. But where did they find God? And what does this teach us about where we should look for God and where we will find God? I can tell you that in Honduras, choice or desire is rarely a factor in a person's moving across borders, deciding where to live or whether to stay there. A springboard for my ministry in Honduras was time spent in 2014 on the border in El Paso, Texas. I volunteered with an organization that housed and helped hundreds, if not thousands, of immigrants, children, and mothers who were seeking asylum, mostly from Central America. Last week, that same organization started helping thousands more, mostly parents reunited with their children after a cruel separation. And now that I'm in Honduras, I see these parents from another perspective. Since moving to Honduras, I have not gone a week without meeting a family who has someone in the United States, either documented or mojado, undocumented. In the church, I have met a couple who work as coyotes, smuggling people across borders for a fee. Every single family in Honduras is touched by migration. Remittances, or money sent back to Honduras from other countries, make up nearly 20% of the country's GDP, according to the Central Bank of Honduras, and that number is increasing faster than the country's overall domestic production. The economy has no momentum of its own. It is hugely dependent on the United States, on the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. So what does this mean to us in reading this text in Matthew today? Well, when you read chapter 2 of Matthew and you read Galilee, think of Honduras, the quote-unquote developing neighbor of Judea. When you read Jerusalem, think of Tegucigalpa, and remember its ironclad connection to Rome, or Washington, D.C., the seat of political and economic power. When you read Egypt, think of the Texas-Mexico border, where the refugees go. When we read the biblical text, we must never, ever, ever forget the dynamics of dependence and power. Of course, we know that this gospel writer chose to emphasize these details to solidify Jesus' claim to divinity, as outlined in both the Hebrew scripture and the Roman political system. And this text is subversive in both directions. The infant Jesus, making no choice of his own, becomes a refugee, confounding all expectations of where divinity should be found, not in Jerusalem, but on the highways and the byways and the in-between places and the borderlands. As I said, I'm an immigrant by choice. I have the enormous privilege of a U.S. passport. I'm here with you, in fact, because one of our partners in Honduras, Selenia Ordóñez, was denied a visa to come and make this trip. The U.S. Embassy didn't grant the visa, so I came with my friend Nora instead. Earlier this summer, I traveled with a Honduran youth group who has a partnership with a youth group in the United States in Pennsylvania. 8 of those youth members, 8 of the 13 who were to travel with us, were also denied tourist visas. These teens and 20-somethings, even with letters of invitation and support from U.S. Presbyterians, couldn't provide enough evidence in a 3-minute interview that they were not intending to stay permanently in the United States. Imagine if you were denied a visa to travel to another country. Imagine if you were denied that visa and your family is permanently separated. That your husband or one of your children is in the United States and that you have no resources to continue applying for tourist visas. Imagine that you have a job that pays you $15 a day, so you can't afford to keep paying the $160 fee to apply for a U.S. visa. Imagine that you live with many other family members in a barrio of Tegucigalpa that sadly is governed by a violent gang that is recruiting your younger children. Imagine that the police refuse to enter your neighborhood for fear of their own lives, or perhaps they collude with the gang to keep residents in and others out. What would you do if that was your situation? Would you flee? Would you try to reunite your family? Perhaps a more profound question, where would you be finding God among all of these dire choices? Where would you be looking for God? In the empire? In the law? Imagine that Joseph and Mary had been denied permission to travel to Egypt or to return to Galilee. Imagine that the crucifixion had not happened when Jesus was 33 years old, but 3 years old. Where would we be expecting Joseph and Mary to find God or to look for God? I can tell you where I have found God. In the last 6 months, I have found God in the faces of immigrant children eating a peanut butter sandwich, their first meal in days. I have found God in the faces of the youth of Puerto Grande, Honduras, who long to make their hometown a place they don't have to leave in order to survive. I have found God in the efforts of Presbyterians of El Horno, Honduras, struggling against government efforts to remove them from farmland that, even though they have lived there for generations, they don't have ownership papers, and they have to leave the home that they know and love. I have found God in the partnerships, the empowerment of women, such as my sister Nora, to take on projects of service and mission. I have found God in the intentional relationships of equality formed between youth groups of Pennsylvania and Tegucigalpa. These partnerships are subversive and law-breaking. They resist the rules of dependence and colonialism that is always present I have found God in the face of the Presbyterian elder of Buenos Aires, who is doing seminary-level work, even though he never attended school a day in his life, can barely read and write. He wants to better himself, to better serve his church, to better his community, and to make it a place that young people can choose to stay and make a home in. Where do we look for God, and where do we truly find God? This story of the slaughter of innocents tells us not where you think you should find God, among the rulers, among the powerful, among those where conventional wisdom tells us we should find God. We find God in the innocent, the lowly, the vulnerable, the endangered. We find God not on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence, but on the road, among the movers and the migrants. We find God among those who resist and defy oppression. We find God among the lawbreakers. Amen.